Hey everybody, Qroo here. Welcome to the channel. Lately I've been talking a lot about the Spanish subjunctive in several of my videos, and people have asked for more information about it, or do I have some type of a playlist they can go through so they can use the Spanish subjunctive correctly. So what I decided to do is to make a new Spanish series for my channel called Spanish Subjunctive Triggers. So in this series, I'm going to be showing you the grammatical constructions that trigger the use of the Spanish subjunctive so you will always use it correctly. You may have heard me say this before in other videos, but the Spanish subjunctive is definitely the keystone to mastering Spanish. Yet it is overlooked by so many students of the language, especially English speakers. As a result, their Spanish tends to get stuck at a certain level and they're complaining about plateauing, but that will not be you, because I'm going to help you break through that plateau with this series. The whole topic of the Spanish subjunctive confuses a lot of students, and I think it has a lot to do with how it's explained. When you ask, what is the subjunctive? And then you get this really odd answer. I recently saw this definition. The Spanish subjunctive is a mood used in the Spanish language to express uncertainty, subjectivity, doubt, possibility, or hypothetical situations. It is also used to describe situations or events that are not necessarily real or certain. Okay, what is that exactly? I gotta tell you, I use the Spanish subjunctive every day, and it's not as complicated as they make it sound. But that definition and definitions like that are what makes students kind of overthink it. And they're like, okay, so doubt, uncertainty. All right, I think I'm getting a grasp of it. But then they see sentences like this one. Tienes que lavar el carro antes de que llegue tu papá. You have to wash the car before your father arrives. Now look at this verb, llegue. That comes from the verb llegar, to arrive, but it's not in the present indicative, which is the plain old present tense. That would be llega. It's llegue. It's in the subjunctive. But then I think back to our definition of the subjunctive, and I'm thinking, well, is there some doubt that father will arrive? Is he okay? Did he leave us or something? Is he injured? Should we check on him? Or is his arriving somehow wrapped in some hypothetical situation? So using that definition, I wouldn't think to use the subjunctive here. So what is this all about? But then I guess if I start to really think through it, I'm thinking, okay, maybe there is a chance dad won't arrive, and it's that chance that's doing it, or possibly because I'm talking about a future situation that has not occurred. But then I see sentences like this one. Suelo levantarme antes de que salga el sol. I usually get up before the sun comes out. I mean, here I'm talking about habitual action that's been going on in time. I think we're all pretty confident the sun's going to come out. Yet it's in the subjunctive mood. Look, salga, that comes from the verb salir, to leave, but it's in the subjunctive. So, although that definition of the subjunctive is not inaccurate, it is incomplete and thus leads to confusion when to actually use this mood in Spanish. I never explain the subjunctive that way. Although I guess technically I just did, but that's not normally how I do it. I normally explain the subjunctive by first referring to the present tense. Think of your present tense verbs in Spanish. Most people start with the present tense, so I'm fairly confident if you're watching this video, you already know the present tense or have had some dealings with it. If not, you should really go learn that before jumping into this series, but I'm assuming you know it. So, back to our present tense in Spanish. That's the whole hablo, hablas, habla, hablamos, etc. With the present tense, you can make sentences like, I want to go to the beach. I like strawberries, etc. It's useful. But that's not the whole story. And this is where the other shoe drops. In fact, you're really only taught about half of what you need to say everything you might need to say in the present tense. I know. Game changer, right? Spanish has moods and tenses, and the one you learned is actually the indicative mood of the present tense. Sometimes you'll hear me refer to it as the present indicative mood or present indicative tense. So if you hear me flip-flopping that, I'm talking about one thing. For many of you, this might be the first time you're actually hearing this information because you were taught that this is the present tense, like this is the only one there is, and now I can say things. Well, unfortunately, the present indicative runs hand in hand with another mood, which is the present subjunctive, and they are completely intertwined in the language. Just so you know, the subjunctive appears in the past tense too, but let's not get ahead of ourselves, okay? We'll be talking about that in other episodes. So as a native English speaker learning Spanish, how do you learn the subjunctive? Well, my advice is don't get caught up in that definition of the subjunctive. In fact, forget it, because it's only going to confuse you. Just focus on the fact that certain grammatical constructions in Spanish will require you to use the subjunctive. We're going to call those triggers. So if you learn the triggers, you will always use the subjunctive correctly. You don't have to wrap your head around it. You don't have to go, am I expressing some uncertainty here or a hypothetical situation? You're going to say, I've got this. The subjunctive goes here every single time. And the great part about this is by learning triggers, you'll actually be able to speak grammatically correct Spanish long before you develop an ear for the language. One of those subjunctive triggers, and the one I'll be teaching you in today's episode, is the one that appeared in those examples. Antes de que. It triggers the subjunctive every single time. In fact, I want you to remember it more like this. Antes de que plus subjunctive. And that means before something else happens. This construction will always take the subjunctive. Isn't that easier to learn it that way? I think so. Let's take a look at a few examples. I moved them around a little, so I'm saying the before part in the beginning of the sentence, but I could have easily flipped them. In fact, we will. So let's take a look at our first one. Antes de que empiece la película. Before the film begins, tengo que comprar palomitas. I have to buy popcorn. Remember, our construction always triggers the subjunctive, so you'll see it's empiece, which comes from the verb empezar, to begin, but it's in the subjunctive mood. Our next one. Antes de que cante el gallo, before the rooster sings, debemos levantarnos para ir a trabajar. We should get up in order to go to work. Take a look at our verb there. We already know it's in the Spanish subjunctive because we know it's a trigger. It comes from the verb cantar, but it's cante. Antes de que oscurezca, quiero encontrar un lugar seguro para acampar. Before it gets dark, I want to find a safe place to camp. Our main verb there is oscurecer, to get dark. Sometimes you'll see it in the reflexive, oscurecerse, and it's in the subjunctive mood. Antes de que lleguen los invitados, debemos preparar la cena. Before the guests arrive, we should prepare the dinner. So our verb after antes de que comes from the verb llegar, to arrive, but it's in the Spanish subjunctive, which is lleguen. Here's our last one. Antes de que se enfríe el café, debemos tomarlo. Before the coffee gets cold, we should drink it. Our verb there is enfriarse, and it's in what mood? The subjunctive. This isn't that hard, right? This is your trigger for the day. As I said, we can flip the order on this, so let's do that. Take a look at the screen. Same information, right? But now you're seeing antes de que in the middle of the sentence. So take a moment to look at all of these sentences. One thing that may stand out to you is that there is a subject change in all of them. There are two clauses, right, that are separated by that antes de que, and there are two different subjects. And that's not a coincidence, my friends. No. That's something that's going to help trigger the subjunctive. So let's say we have a sentence that only has one subject. For example, I usually read before going to bed. I'm not going to have antes de que plus subjunctive. I'm going to have antes de and then just drop in infinitive verbs or the unconjugated verb. So I usually read before going to bed. Suelo leer antes de acostarme. See, I took acostarse and dropped it in, but it had to agree with me, so I have a little me. Suelo leer, I usually read antes de, before acostarme, going to bed. One subject, I'm the only subject, no subject change. So here's another one. I want to make a list of pending assignments or tasks before going off on vacation. Quiero hacer una lista de tareas pendientes antes de irme de vacaciones. Now I will tell you that sometimes when there is not a subject change, you may still hear antes de que plus a subjunctive, but I don't recommend you follow that format. No subject change, antes de plus infinitive. There is a subject change, antes de que plus subjunctive. This isn't that tough, right? Learn the triggers, plug in the subjunctive conjugations. That's it. So speaking of conjugations, if you don't know the present subjunctive conjugations and that's what you're kind of stuck on, I do have a video on that subject. I got to warn you, it's pretty dry, but well, you got to at least get that, okay? So you'll find a link to that other video, the one about how to conjugate, in the description portion of this video. Learning the conjugations is the easy part, especially if you already know the present tense. The tough part is knowing when to use the subjunctive, and that's where this series comes in. I'm going to be teaching you those subjunctive triggers just like the one we did from today. I don't want you to become overwhelmed from information overload, so I'm only going to cover, say, 1 or 2 triggers in each one of the episodes of this series. So if you don't want to miss any of those, be sure to subscribe to the channel and hit that little bell so you'll receive a notification anytime I come out with something new. Well, that's it for today. Until next time, hasta luego.